Welcome to the Andy Staples Show. We continue to go deep down into our State of the Program series at The Athletic. But interestingly enough, and I did not realize when I decided this week we were going to do Miami and Michigan State, that I'd be talking about something very similar 2 days in a row until I read Colton Pouncy's State of the Program story on the Spartans. And that leads off with a quote from Michigan State's athletic director, Alan Haller, about Mel Tucker's extension. And this is what Alan Haller told Colton. Obviously, the extension was about Mel and his abilities to bring what he brings to our campus and our community. But it was also a statement to say Michigan State has a long-term plan to be committed to a successful football program. If that doesn't sound like what Miami just did and what Manny Navarro and I talked about on yesterday's show, I don't know what does. Colton Pouncy, welcome.
Thanks, Andy. It's good to be here. How you doing?
Good. So Mel Tucker, the $95 million man coming off a great season, you've covered this team for a while. So you were there for the end of the Mark D'Antonio era, pretty dark times. The search that landed Mel Tucker, which I guess was Michigan State money whipping Colorado into losing Mel Tucker. But yep. This feels different. This feels like Michigan State saying, no, we'd rather be more like Ohio State.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I did catch up with Alan last week, and we kind of talked about a lot of things. Michigan State has some money coming in for new facilities, the Mel Tucker contract extension. In his words, he kind of felt like that was the next step for the program. Myself coming in 2018, covering Mark D'Antonio, back then he was talking about facilities and kind of the things that Michigan State needs to do to get to that next level. I think at Big Ten Media Days in 2019, he was talking about how a couple years earlier, Michigan State and Clemson were both in the college football playoff. Now, one program, ascended and Michigan State fell back to the pack. Some of that has to do with recruiting and different things like that. But he also felt like, there's some things that we can do as a program, as an athletic department, to kind of boost ourselves after what I've done all these years, raising the level of this program, what it can be. And so he was talking about, those facilities, and I think he took a trip to Clemson with Allen and the former AD Bill Beekman, toward their facilities. Was talking about that back then. He kind of saw into the future, like this is kind of what we need to do to kind of be more respected as a program and take ourselves to that next level. So it was kind of a continuation of that when Mel Tucker came in. He's been at places like Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State, and he's seen these facilities and, kind of what it takes to be a modern program. And not just that, but recruiting and the dedication takes to all those things. And he's like, Michigan State, he in his mind can get there. Now, the rest of us might be skeptical, but in his mind, he fully believes that Michigan State can get to that level. And Michigan State's now providing him with the resources to at least attempt that. And I don't know if that was always the case at Michigan State. With Nick Saban in the late 90s, they let him go to LSU. D'Antonio didn't always have those resources, even when he was winning, that 2013 to 15 run. He didn't really have that. So at least Michigan State right now, they're making a concerted effort to say, we're dedicated to this football program. We think we have our guy in place. We locked him up for the next 10 years. Let's see what he can do.
So how much of this was their regret going back and saying, we had Nick Saban on our campus and we let him go to LSU and become Nick Saban. And here's another guy who's doing really well right now who, oh, by the way, LSU's open. Let's make sure he doesn't do the same thing.
Yeah, I have to imagine that was a big part of it. Nick Saban was one of the guys that said, hey, when you guys are looking for a coach, I have a guy that's perfect for you. This is Mel Tucker. He was at this program when I was there in the late 90s. He's one of my mentees, and he's the right guy for the program. So he actually vouched for Mel Tucker to get that job. And I think when Michigan State saw his success and saw all the things he was doing behind the scenes, even when they went, 2-5 in 2020, they beat a couple of ranked teams. You could kind of see things trending in the right direction with recruiting, with his mentality, all the stuff that he brings to the table. And then 2021 season, that was sort of, this is, proof of concept. We actually have that now. So I think they were kind of seeing to the future, being like, we're heading in the right direction. If we lose this guy after a year or 2 or 3 years, like, what's the point? What was all this for? We got to lock this guy in place and see what he can do, and then provide him with everything he needs to at least attempt to get there. So I think, the Saban stuff is somewhat played a part, but it was more of them just saying, well, what good is having this dude if we're going to lose him in a couple of years? Let's try to make sure that he sticks around for a little bit at least.
So they proof of concept is a great term to use for last season because you saw how good they can be. They, more than anyone else, used the transfer portal to transform their team. Interestingly enough, it wasn't a quarterback because you assume if you transform as much as they did, it will be a quarterback. But the homegrown guy, Peyton Thorne, wins the job. Anthony Russo did not win the job. But then really key spots, most notably tailback, they got much, much better very fast. How much did that sort of change the trajectory of that program?
I think it changed it a lot. You can argue, Peyton Thorne obviously won that job. Anthony Russo didn't. But I think you make the argument that bringing in a veteran like Russo really got the most out of Peyton Thorne. Not that he wasn't going to compete his ass off throughout, but I think it raised his level of competition and said, hey, I got to win this job. If I want to play here, I have to give it my all in the offseason, go hard 24/7. Otherwise, this dude's going to come and take my job. I think that happened at a lot of positions, not just the quarterback position. They brought in some linebackers to kind of raise that depth. The cornerback position, they brought in Ronald Williams from Florida, from Alabama, Chester Kimbrough from Florida, kind of raise the depth there at certain positions. And obviously a guy like Kenneth Walker, when he comes in and does what he does, you're going to be pretty good. So yeah, I think across the board, just the level of talent, the level of competition increased. And that, Mel Tucker is like a cutthroat dude. He'll tell you, like, no job is guaranteed. Like, if you want to play, you got to work. And that's what he did. That was kind of his signal. He didn't have a chance to do that in 2020 when things were shut down. Couldn't really evaluate his roster, couldn't bring in any of his own players or guys that he liked. So he kind of used that offseason, 2020 going into 2021 to kind of put his fingerprints all over this program and say, this is how we run things, which I think you kind of saw it play out in that 2021 season.
Well, to talk about Mel Tucker's roster building, we have another friend with us. If you've been watching on the YouTube channel, you already know Ari Wasserman is here with us. Ari was not scheduled to be part of this podcast originally, but then I popped open my Athletic app. And by the way, if you're not subscribing to the Athletic and reading Colton Pouncy's Michigan State stuff and Ari's recruiting stuff and whatever nonsense I write, what are you waiting for? $1 a month for your first 6 months. Go to theathletic.com/Andy Staples. But Ari, in his recruiting mailbag, first question out of the gate is about Michigan State recruiting. And Ari, you apologized for being wrong. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, listen, if you're a sports writer and you have opinions, as many as I have, and you can't admit when you're wrong, then you're just an asshole. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not right 100% of the time, nor do I try to pretend like I am, and I just made a bad error because let me tell you guys this. When Michigan State hired Mel Tucker, I thought he was the perfect hire because of his background in Ohio, his background being an assistant at Ohio State, his relationships with the high school coaches and the kind of the backbone of what, Ohio high school football is all about. And the fact that I saw Mark D'Antonio, who, in my opinion, was probably one of the 5 best coaches in college football during the height of Michigan State's success in the last 5 years, 10 years, or however long it's been now. And I thought that they were going to try to duplicate what Mark D'Antonio did because he did such an amazing job. And I loved that because, like, to me, Michigan State, like, it's like, what do you think Michigan State should be? And I think Michigan State should be a team that is always a really hard team to beat, plays hard place to go, and is good enough to win the Big Ten once every 4 or 5 years. Like, I don't view Michigan State, and I don't know if Michigan State fans, Colton probably has a better idea of this than I do, think that they're a team that's going to be competing to win the conference every single year, regardless of turnover. So when I write about Michigan State, I thought, oh my God, Michigan State gave Mel Tucker $100 million because he struck gold in the transfer portal one time. And I'm like, oh my goodness, because I looked at their class last year and their 2022 class was good for Michigan State standard, but it's not win the Big Ten standard. And I was like, unless he continues to own the transfer portal like he did last year, which is highly unlikely considering the transfer portal is becoming more and more mainstream every minute that passes, Michigan State just gave somebody $100 million to run a program that might be pretty solid, but not elite. And he's the 4th highest paid coach in college football. So when you pay somebody $100 million, what's the expectation? That they're going to be solid or that they're going to be awesome? And I think you can ask the same question about that to Penn State too. But then Colton told me I was wrong. Thank you, Colton.
Yeah.
And I respect Colton because he's awesome
Won't
at
be
his
the
job. And
won't be the last time.
it won't be the last time. No, it won't. I mean, it wouldn't be entertaining if I was always right or if I just said everything blandly. But I saw the official visits list in Michigan State, and I don't know if those numbers, because that was from a few weeks ago, but you showed me a tweet that they had the most talent booked for official visits already out of anybody in college football, which is a fun stat. Was it 33 official visits? It's probably more now.
It's more
that
now,
were
yeah.
booked.
And they were ahead of Georgia.
That's right.
They were number
total
one.
talent.
Georgia's 2 and Florida was 3 at the time. Now, obviously, I think Ohio State and Alabama have probably bumped up a little bit.
And I went and I looked through the visitors who were booked, and there are a lot of high-end 4-star prospects from all over the country. They're in Texas, they're in Florida, they're all over the place. Colton probably knows them off the top of their head better than I do. And I look at their offers lists to see what kind of 4 stars they are. The Texas kids have A&M in Texas, and the other top fringe top 100 players have elite level programs in there. And so for me to say that they are relying on Ohio is wrong. Now, I'm assuming that Ohio will always be a piece to what they do because it's close and there's talent there. And, they've had so much success in the past getting, Ohio kids to come in and change their program. But I think Michigan State's in a very interesting spot right now because last year's class, in my opinion, isn't good enough to be what you think they should be. But at the same time, they might have a chance this year to sign a really, really, really good class. So right now I'm wrong because the visitors are coming in, but Mel Tucker's got to go earn that money and close now. So it'll be a very interesting few months to see how they do.
Yeah. All right. We kind of talked about this when we were at Elite 11 last year.
And I'm going to miss you there this year, bud.
I know.
It's not going to be the same without you, man.
It won't. But, we talked about this, and I was trying to tell you then, yeah, I see a lot of the similarity. I see what you were getting at where, you have these 2 dudes that are, basically rooted in Ohio, both coached together at Ohio State. I think at Michigan State too in the late 90s on Saban's staff. So they have a lot of, they've crossed paths a lot of different times, but they're really just polar opposites in everything they do, where D'Antonio would take a 5'9" corner who he thought could be a really good cover corner, something like that. Tucker won't even recruit them. They won't even be on his board. Even if they're a top 300 player that's 5'9", he's not going to recruit that kid. So, we've talked about the size elements and the requirements he has there with recruiting. He's tailored his entire social media department for recruiting. Whereas I talked to their creative staff a few years ago. D'Antonio wanted everything internally. Everything that the creative team did was for the team. They would show it these pregame hype videos for the players in the locker room. Tucker's saying, no, put all this stuff out there so they can see what we're doing so we can kind of attract those players. He puts his, Nikes and his sneakers on Twitter and everything, whereas D'Antonio would never do something like that. And then I think, when it comes to roster management and all that stuff, D'Antonio's, was a little bit more faithful to his own roster, whereas Tucker is a little bit more cutthroat. One of his favorite sayings is compete to play, compete to stay. And then again, when it comes to recruiting, the recruiting map has widened tremendously. I don't even know if Ohio is a big element of Michigan State's game plan anymore. I would say the new Ohio for them would probably be Georgia. And that's not to say they're going to land all these top 100 kids at Georgia. But I think the way Mel sees it is I've coached at Georgia. I have all these connections there. I know all those high school coaches. I think I have an in more than maybe D'Antonio did. And so for him, it's if I can get a 3-star kid out of Georgia who's maybe a top 500, 600 player versus the same type of talent in Michigan, I'd rather get that kid because he's bigger, faster, stronger. They play football year-round down there, things like that. I think that kid's going to be more prepared to compete right away at Michigan State than a kid, maybe in-state that's a top 500 player, maybe a lower 4-star type who might not have the training and the athleticism and everything they look for. So I think that's sort of one of the differences there. And then the map, California, Texas, you can go on the 24/7 list and look at all the states that they're getting.
Georgia, Michigan, Arizona, Florida, California, Colorado, Indiana, Minnesota, Nevada, and Texas.
How many kids from the Midwest are there, It paints wholeheartedly. And
6.
I don't think people realize that. And I looked this up right before this podcast. Michigan State between 2022 and 2023 have added 10 4-star prospects, and that's including it's still early in 2023. 10 between those 2 years. 2017, 18, 19, 20, and then 2021, Tucker's first class, same number, 10 4-stars. So they're bringing in these kids, they're getting them on campus, and they feel if they have a chance to show them around campus, come in for these official visits over the summer, that they'll at least keep him an option down the road, and then who knows what happens from there. So
the question
getting
that
their
I
foot in
have
the
to
door,
that, though, is like, is recruiting nationally sustainable for Michigan State?
why not? Why wouldn't it be?
I don't know how many middle tier programs from where they're starting. I'm not saying they're going to be that way, but from where they're starting have had a successful national recruiting plan that's extended over a 5-year period.
Clemson. That's it.
Okay,
That's the list.
so the list is Clemson, and I guess the example.
But Miami's trying. But Miami's trying to do that now.
Okay.
But
Okay,
Ari,
so I guess they're Clemson then.
If only there was a paradigm shift in the entire sport that changed the way everything works. Oh wait, there was. So
well, I don't know. I'm not an expert on like Michigan State's booster situation. So
but they it's a giant school with a huge alumni base, like. And this is Colton, Ari and I were having this discussion before you came on and before we started recording. And I want to get your take on this. I have a theory that any top half Big Ten program, if they decide to go all in, so we're talking about, obviously Ohio State is all in. They are the best of the best. But if Penn State, Michigan State, I say Wisconsin, maybe Iowa, but the geography may hurt them a little too much. But those other ones I mentioned, if they said we're going to spend like Alabama and Georgia spend, we're going to just basically what Miami said they were going to do. We're going to spend like Clemson spends. With the right coach, they can be a year in, year out conference title contender and a year in, year out national title contender. Am I wrong?
There hasn't been a single national title contender in the Big Ten that's not Ohio State in the last 10 years.
The amount of money that they have now, and the size of these alumni bases at the schools I just mentioned, like it can be just like the top third of the SEC.
So your prediction is that the NIL era is going to create more parity, especially in the Big Ten.
Yes, and it'll be like the top third of the SEC, where Georgia, LSU, Alabama, mostly Alabama, but Georgia, LSU, Alabama, Auburn, and Florida have won national titles in the last 15 years. The schools I just mentioned in the Big Ten, if they all say we're going to spend the way Alabama and Ohio State spend on football and treat football the way they treat football, they absolutely can get into that if they have the right coach.
What's the Aaron Rodgers butter thing? The cleanse thing?
Oh, I don't think it's butter. He took something that made him puke and poop.
Insides.
Yeah. You puke and poop. That's.
If a Big Ten team that's not Ohio State wins a national championship in the next 5 years, I'll do that.
I cannot wait. Ari's going to pay me $1,000 when USC doesn't make the playoffs in the next 3 years, and then
wins a national championship.
And then when Michigan State or Wisconsin wins a national championship, we're going to watch. I don't really want to film that, Ari.
No, you have to be in the room filming, and you have got to get the ghee butter.
Listen, I'll hold the mic, but I'm not. I might just be like in a bubble in a hazmat suit holding the mic.
I'll be nowhere near that, just so you guys know.
But am I wrong? Am I crazy for thinking that?
You are, yeah.
Am I crazy for thinking that?
Look, I don't know if Michigan State's going to win a national championship in the next 5 years. If I had to bet, I would say no. But at the same time, like they are going to try to be more competitive, and that's all you can ask out of this era. And I think with the money, I think Michigan State will be competitive in NIL. I don't think they'll be dropping bags left and right, but they'll go after some players, and they have a couple billionaire donors that will probably, be a resource for them. And again, I think with Tucker's mindset, he's been all those places, and he thinks, why not at Michigan State? That's why he signed this extension. Who knows if he's going to be there for the entire 10 years of that contract, but he's around to see this through, and I think that's all you can ask for as a coach like that and a program like Michigan State.
Let's talk about this team on the field. Replacing Walker obviously is the biggest question offensively, but my bigger question offensively is how do you replace Connor Hayward? Because it feels like he was the most important person to what they did, even though Walker was the one who probably got the best of the stats out of it.
Yeah, Hayward was sort of this jack of all trades type of H-back, tight end, whatever you wanted to call him. And I think people at Michigan State were kind of clamoring for that position change for years. He was playing running back under Mark D'Antonio, and like no offense to him, he just doesn't have great vision. He's not fast. He's a big dude. He's kind of slow. So when you put him back there with a terrible offensive line and ask him to rush for 1,000 yards, like that was doomed from the start. So they kind of noticed, hey, this dude has great hands. He's a natural receiver. Why not just put him at tight end? Like, who cares if he's a little undersized? And so what you saw last year was him paving the way a lot of times for Kenneth Walker's big runs, sealing the edge and, using his hands and going up to get passes and sort of being the glue guy for the offense last year. And that helped his draft stock tremendously. It's why he got drafted. He's with his brother now with the Steelers. But I think when you lose a guy like that, it's always tough. Offensive coordinator Dre Johnson calls that tight end position the MVP of the offense just because of all the things that they're asked to do. So they have a young guy named Malik Carr. He's a 4-star wide receiver. I think the 2020 class, went to Purdue, then transferred to Michigan State last year. They switched him to tight end last offseason, and the returns so far are pretty good. He's kind of the backup to Connor Hayward. I think a lot of is expected of him this year. He's a big dude, runs like a gazelle. He's like 6'5". I think he's got NFL potential. He's got to learn how to block and all the nuance of that position, but I think they like him a lot. And then they also brought in Daniel Barker, a transfer from Illinois. I think he's got 1 year of eligibility left. I think he holds like some records there for tight ends at Illinois.
Touchdown catches by a tight end, which is a pretty good record to hold.
Absolutely. So he's coming in, and I think he'll be a guy that maybe can be a stopgap for Malik Carr if he's not fully ready to take that job yet. So you have those two guys there replacing.
Malik Carr was on the basketball team too, right?
He was, yeah, one of two football players on the basketball team this year.
God,
so I think he's very athletic and he can go up and get some passes. So I think they like him and his potential. It's just a matter of if he can get there now or maybe needs another year next year.
This is interesting to me because everything changed so much last year, but they were pretty heavy in the portal this year too. How many guys are they going to pull from the portal who are going to wind up not just in the 2D but starting?
I think there can be as many as maybe 7. Wow. Which is crazy. I mean, you got 2 running backs, Jalen Berger and Jarek Broussard. Broussard was the 2020 Pac-12 Offensive Player of the Year. I think he's probably going to win that job, whereas Berger might be the backup, but that's maybe your top 2 backs there you pull from the portal. An offensive lineman, Brian Greene, came over from Washington State. He's probably going to be a starting right guard. They have 2 linebackers that they got from the portal that I really like a lot. Aaron Brule from Mississippi State and Jacoby Windman from UNLV. Windman had, I think, 118 tackles last year, really, quick on his feet, moves well. I think both those guys can end up starting. So that's maybe 4 right there.
Yeah.
Mere speed.
Yeah. Brule's I did the Mississippi State state of the program. Brule's situation was just that Jet Johnson, essentially, he in his 5th year in the program, came out of nowhere to be the best player on the defense, and Brule lost his job, but to a guy who made 100 tackles in the SEC. Right. So, Brule can start for almost anybody. So it is going to be it's going to be interesting to see how they do this, but interesting to hear you talk about Mel Tucker's philosophy. And I've talked to Mel about this, and when he talks about other teams and other players, he is always very complimentary of the coaching staffs that seem to understand what a roster must look like to be competitive, and what the offensive linemen have to look like, what the defensive linemen have to look like, what the corners need to look like. And that goes back to the Nick Saban critical factors thing, which goes back to Don James at Kent State and then at Washington. And I'm just curious, do you think he can get, because the issue is a lot of times a coach will say, I will take the athleticism or the size archetype.
Yeah.
And the ones that get both, that's Ohio State and Georgia and Alabama.
Yeah.
Do you think Michigan State can get both? Or will they have to pick one over the other?
I think they can. They won't get all of them, obviously, but they'll get their fair share. I mean, when you look at this 2021 class, they were definitely leaning more size and not the total package. That's because, it was a new coach, not a ton of time to recruit in person that year. And I think you saw some of that carry over to 2022, but at the same time, I asked him in December, I was like, based off the year you guys just had, you go 11-2, 10-2 regular season, do you feel like you'll be able to reach more of those kids, more of those top talent? He was like, oh, absolutely. Like, we're already getting in the door with them. They're already impressed with what we did this past year. And, based on our resources, things that we can do, like, we feel confident that we'll be able to land some of those kids. And I think you're seeing it just by the fact that they're getting all these prospects on campus already. These are kids Antonio never would have gone after. Whereas Tucker doesn't have that self-imposed restriction where it's like, no, let's just stick to our Midwest. We'll get our Michigan guys. We'll get our Ohio guys, maybe the occasional Illinois kid. He's like, no, like, let's open up the map. We'll bring you guys in, see what we can do. And a lot of these kids end up saying, wow, I didn't know Michigan State's campus was this big. I didn't know it looked like this. I know this.
Didn't know that ice cream at the creamery tasted so good.
There you go. Yeah, the dairy store.
Yeah. Well, so Ari and I were talking about this before we started the show. Ari, I'm curious how you feel about this because you mentioned D'Antonio, and there was D'Antonio's foray into we're going to recruit higher rated prospects that ended in disaster. That was 2006, this 2016 class. And I argue that he just chose the wrong ones. Like when one of them's getting arrested on signing day, probably a sign that it's not going as well as you think it is. But we've seen that. We've seen going for high rated classes where it's not really, you're not filling your needs necessarily. Tennessee suffered from that multiple classes and that put them in a hole. I would say Florida had a couple like that where they're just chasing stars at the end, and it's not necessarily to fill any sort of need or not specific to your scheme that you're running. It feels like Mel Tucker has more of a plan for this. Yeah, well, and it feels very similar to Kirby Smart and Nick Saban's plans for that sort of thing.
Well, I've got a lot of thoughts about that.
Yeah, go for it, Ari.
Number one, I think Mark D'Antonio's genius was evaluation. Because not only did he go and get those 3-star prospects, out of the Midwest that weren't getting big offers.
Darquez Denard from Dry Branch, Georgia, where they went to look at the receiver on the other team and were like, "Holy crap, this guy can play!"
And then those guys came up and not only contributed but contributed early. Like he was a great evaluator. So like later on in his career, when they went to the playoff and they beat Ohio State and won the Big Ten and built those teams that did what they did, I felt like he changed who he was at the end to try to win a national championship. And I can't say that I blame him for that because, you get to a certain point and you want to do what you can to get higher. And I guess the only way that he felt that they could do that was to go into a national recruiting approach and, go after guys that are rated higher. Now, I don't know if they were just star chasing, but they certainly were trying to up their recruiting results. So like that's Mel Tucker's plan right now, but maybe Mel Tucker's a better recruiter than D'Antonio.
Well, I also think just because it didn't work out for one class, that 2016 class, doesn't mean you have to stop chasing 4 stars and elite talent altogether. I just think, there's some red flags that Mark D'Antonio overlooked big time with that class, and it ended up screwing him in the end. But at the same time, I also think he overcorrected a little bit, whereas that next class, it was like, well, I'm going to go back to my bread and butter, doing exactly what I did, kind of pass up on some kids that probably would have come to Michigan State if you went after them. At the same time, there's more competition for those 3 stars from Ohio. Kentucky got in the mix. Cincinnati started their rise. So it's like, I don't think that game plan would have been sustainable. Like you talk about Mel Tucker's thing, is that sustainable?
But Michigan State should be winning those battles, in my opinion. They should be beating.
I don't know if that's a guarantee. Yeah. I mean, for those kids in Ohio, whereas obviously the top kids are going to go to Ohio State and maybe Notre Dame. Like if you're fighting for all these 3 stars, mid to lower tier 3 stars with schools like Cincinnati and Kentucky, and other schools that come in there, I don't think it's a guarantee. It's easy to say MSU should be winning those, but I think instead of fighting for lower tier prospects in that state, they're going to Georgia, they're going to Texas and fighting over there where there's more talent.
Atlanta's like the most competitive market in college football recruiting outside of
Florida. If you're
getting chased out of Ohio because you can't beat Kentucky and Cincinnati,
if you
have a national recruiting plan.
If you have a coach that's been in Georgia, that's competed for national championship, Georgia, all these connections, why not?
You still got to get on an airplane.
But if you're going to spend $95 million on a coach, you better swing for the damn fences.
No, I know, I understand that, but it's also
don't even try to fight Kentucky for players.
We're saying here that they have a national recruiting plan and they're going up against SEC programs instead of Kentucky and Cincinnati, and we're talking about a coach who hasn't signed a top 100 player.
I'm not saying Mel is scared of Ohio. I'm saying D'Antonio, with his recruiting strategy, he wasn't landing those kids versus Kentucky and Cincinnati. Those programs had more juice by the end of his tenure than he had back then.
And the question too, I want to know, and I don't know what the actual answer to this is, but when you look at the 247 composite rankings, there's a ranking system between 1 and 1,000 that the players are ranked what they're ranked. And I think there seems to be this understanding. I read a lot about it in the comments today on Twitter, but apparently people value a player who's rated 550 in Georgia higher than 320 in Ohio. Do people think that just because somebody lives in Georgia that they're bigger, stronger, and faster?
No, they play better players. And
so the rankings are wrong.
And they're surrounded by better players.
Because they're ranked. Like, it doesn't matter where you're from. If you're the 320 player, and
but
you're
it's very difficult to compare someone who plays, now it depends
so you
on where
think
you
that
are.
the player in Georgia is better than the player in Ohio?
If you take that player in Georgia and drop them in Michigan, they're probably a 4-star based on
depends
what
on
they
where
would
they
do
are,
against
but yeah.
that competition.
Yeah.
That's the argument.
So then the entire ranking system is flawed in your mind.
No one's saying that.
The entire ranking system
Of course it is. If you
flawed,
take a
Ari.
player that's
we know that.
If you take a player that's rated 550 and drop him in Michigan, and he's a 4-star player, then that means that he's misranked.
No,
Ari.
The idea is if a player who's maybe a world guy on his team, not the top prospect, maybe like the 5th best player on that team in Georgia, if it's stacked, you drop that player in Michigan where he's a star and has more chances to shine. I think maybe that helps his ranking. I don't think that's a stretch to say.
Yeah,
no, I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just wondering if people think that
you take an above-average high school team from the Atlanta area and send them into Ohio or Michigan to play the best teams. They're going to handle themselves very well.
So basically, what you're counting on is that Michigan State thinks that the 550th best player in Georgia is actually better than the 320th best player
in some cases. Sure. They've gone after lower ranked Georgia kids than higher ranked Michigan.
That's the whole plan. Yeah, and I'm very curious to see how that plans out. Maybe you'll be. I'm not saying you're wrong. I just find it fascinating because it's just a simple numbers list. It's rudimentary math.
It's not though, because there's more to look at.
No, I know, but that means that the entire system.
There's more people. Now, Ohio's a different animal because Ohio is very much like the southern states in terms of how many people play. How good the coaching is. Like Ohio and Georgia's got more. Georgia may have more people participate. I'd have to see the participation numbers. I'd be curious to see what the difference in participation is in Georgia and Ohio. It could be very similar, but the coaching quality in Ohio is off the charts good. The coaching quality in Georgia is off the charts good. Better than say Florida, Mississippi.
The only thing I'll buy about that is that they do spring football in Georgia and they don't in Ohio. And I think over the course of a 4-year period, if you get 4 spring footballs, that's almost an entire extra season of experience. So, like, I get it. Like, I'm not saying
it also gives those coaches a more of a chance to see them playing actual football.
And there's more camps down there too. So, like, I understand the concept, but you would think that because they play in those leagues and because they have spring football and because there's more access to camps that they would be properly rated and thus rated higher than the Ohio kids. They're 200 spots behind.
Now here's the thing. And Ari, if I have to explain to you why people think football players from the South are better than football players from
no, you don't have to explain to me. I get it. I'm just saying, like,
I mean, the results kind of bear that out over the last.
I know, but the
20
rankings
years.
do too. That's what I'm like. If you have a top stud from the Midwest who's ranked 113. I'm not going to automatically assume that the dude that's ranked 279 in Georgia is better because he lives in Georgia.
But I'm gonna trust the guy who has worked in all those places,
sure,
and evaluated players in all those places,
and making $100 million. You just better not be wrong.
He better not. But here's the other part of this, and this is where the $100 million comes back in. What we're arguing about does not matter if he doesn't get some of those guys that are ranked number 1 in Georgia or number 1 in Florida.
He has to start with top 100 guys first. There
top 100. Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Top. Yep. So number 10 in Georgia or number 20 in Florida.
Like, and number 10 in Georgia has an Alabama offer.
Absolutely. And so that's what matters.
It's just a very tough thing to start your plan. Let's beat Alabama for a guy who's got an Alabama offer. All right.
When you sign that contract, but that's what he signed up for. What's the Don Draper quote we always use on this podcast? That's what the money's for. Like when he signed that contract, that's his job now. Just like last year with the Dan Mullen stuff, where I said I don't know if he understands that his job is to win the national title. When you sign a contract that is $95 million, fully guaranteed, your job is to win the national title. Your job is to beat Alabama for recruits that Alabama wants. Your job is to beat Ohio State for recruits that Ohio State wants. That is now Mel Tucker's job.
But if I signed up for a marathon, how long's a marathon, Mr. Six-Pack?
26.2 miles.
Okay, if I'm like, my wife's going to come home from out of town tonight. She's going to come in and I'll be like, babe, I've been really thinking about, taking care of myself, and I'm really going to commit to being in better shape. And, in order to prove to you that commitment, I'm going to run a marathon. She's not going to be like, all right, Ari, get your ass out there and run 26 miles. It takes the 5 mile run first and the 7 mile run.
No,
and the 2 mile run.
To give a nod to one of Mel Tucker's favorite books. Oh, wrong book. It Takes What It Takes. And that he understands that.
Yeah, if Michigan State comes out and signs a top 5 class with 9 top 100 players in it this year, and half of them are from the South and California, then I will throw him a parade in my neighborhood.
It's not going to happen this year, but what I'm saying is,
but how many players of those
work,
33 players, though, of those 33 players that are coming to campus, you know what? Let's make it an even number. Let's say Mel Tucker has 10 top 150 players coming, and none of them are from the Midwest, and all of them have a blue chip SEC offer. So, Colton, what would you define a success of how many players he would have to sign out of those 10?
Like 4 or 5. I think that's
so
good.
Half? That's a lot.
Sure.
Okay.
They're in on a lot of these dudes. They sit well.
No, I know. They're in on a lot of people. No, I
it's not just, and it's not just getting them on campus for June. Like, they've been building these relationships since they arrived in 2020 with some of these kids. You know, like
I want you to do me a favor when we're done here and go look at the top 10 players in New Jersey for the past 7 years, and then go look at all their final lists and tell me how many had Rutgers in their final list, and then how many of them picked Rutgers. I'm not comparing Michigan State.
What does Rutgers have to do with this?
I'm just saying that
would require all these.
They're the only school
Michigan.
There.
No, but I'm saying like being a hat on the table is one thing. You got to be picked.
Yeah, but Rutgers was a hat on the table because they were down.
He keeps rolling his eyes at me. What am I saying that's wrong?
I get that.
You don't understand the dynamics of the situation you're talking about.
It's never been a hat on the table for a lot of these kids. The fact that that's happening now, I think that's a step in the right direction.
A lot of these kids didn't know Michigan
was going to land all of these kids.
That in order for them to have a successful, or for it to be a success, they have to sign half of these national recruits. Look, that's a huge step forward in a single year.
They had a top 25 class last year, and that was after going 46th the year before. I think this year they'll finish in the 12 to 16 range. And that's another step in the right direction.
And they need to be in the top 8.
Well,
I'm between the two of you here because that's the job.
You just said his job was to win a national championship.
Yeah, they need be in the top 8 and then be in the top 5, and that's how it works.
My thing is, if you can get to 12 to 16 and stat classes like that, and then keep utilizing the portal like they are, I think they can build competitive teams. Now, again, I'm not saying they're going to win a national championship. I think they can be competitive in the Big Ten. I think their goal is to give Ohio State a run every few years and then see what happens from there. And if you do get an expanded playoff years from now.
Which is exactly what they've been for the past decade.
Not really. I mean, when they got there, they got to the playoff in 2015.
The entire Urban Meyer era.
They got to the playoff in 2015. They got embarrassed. Mel Tucker's on the other sideline. It's all exactly what happened, against Alabama that year. So I think he kind of understands I need a higher level of player to try to at least stack up and then give yourself a chance.
I know, but what you described was to be a contender to win the Big Ten every few years and to beat Ohio State. And what did they beat him 3 times during the Urban Meyer era?
Yeah, I'm saying I think Mel Tucker's thinking bigger than that. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. Unless Michigan and Penn State throw in the way Michigan State has.
You got three coaches in the Big Ten East that are being paid to win a national title now.
I'd say 4.
Maybe 4
with Harbaugh.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? That's the SEC. That's the SEC every year. So it's a cutthroat business.
Michigan State, and maybe I'm not remembering this, but like Michigan State in the entire history, has Michigan State's football team won a national title?
Yes.
Yeah.
What year was it?
Like the 60s.
Okay. So
you apparently never watched a Police Academy movie, Ari.
No, I have, but I know Hightower. It's been a while.
Bubba Smith, former Michigan State football player.
I don't know that. I'm sorry, I don't know every single obscure college football fact about the American cinema. But what I do know is that like Michigan State hasn't been what we're describing in like the last 40 years. Is that fair?
Sure.
So like it's going to be like a tough road. Is all I'm saying. Like that's like
it feels like you're confused that Michigan State's trying to punch above its weight. I feel like you're confused by that. I'm just trying to tell you that's Mel Tucker's whole thing.
Yeah, it may not work, but that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Well, it's like you said his job is to win a national championship. Then you compared to what he's trying to do to Clemson, and I'm like, I'm just trying to like in my head. Like,
Ari, do you remember 2008?
Yeah, I remember
what Clemson was.
I remember
what you would have said about Clemson in 2008.
I remember.
Okay.
What Dabo Swinney did with Clemson is probably the most remarkable thing that anyone's done in the sport outside of Nick Saban.
So no one should ever try it?
No.
Again?
If they do it, that'd be insane. I honestly, I would bend down
We're not
and
saying
pray.
they're going to do it. We're saying
I
this
know.
is what they're trying to do.
What's the alternative? You just settle for mediocrity? Like, why not
Yes.
try to? Yes. Okay.
No, I'm kidding. No,
Right.
you're right. I always say that too. I say don't settle for mediocrity. I think it's a very courageous jump to take so quickly.
Sure.
That's all I'm saying.
No, I'm not arguing that.
It's like
it is.
they went from like, maybe we'll sign a top 30 class and get a bunch of Midwestern kids to like, holy shit, Alabama, get out of the way. It's like it's
That's
just a
the dude they brought
huge
in.
jump. Yeah.
Ari,
And I doubt that they'll be able to pull it
Ari,
off the way that it's being
it's you
described.
looking in the mirror when you're a single guy, looking in the mirror and then going to the bar and going, I can talk to her. That's all that is. It's the same attitude.
Well, I talk to everybody.
It's a mindset.
I am aware.
Yeah.
And now Michigan State feels like it can talk to everybody
But
too.
you have me rooting for them. Like, I think it would be great.
Good.
If Michigan State was awesome, that would be awesome.
I feel the same way about Michigan. I feel the same way about Penn State. I feel the same way
Yeah.
about Wisconsin. I feel the same way about a lot of programs that may be able to, in this new era, use the changes to get in that game. We'll see if it happens with Miami. They're going to try it. Florida seems to be trying it. This is the time. If you're going to try to make that shift, now's the chance. So it may work. It probably won't, but it's going to be a hell of a lot of fun to watch. Gentlemen, this has been a pleasure.
Absolutely.